doing?
Oh, Jennifer Shear.
From John, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Very nice to see you.
Deal.
Hey, how you doing? Nice to see you. How you doing? Hey, John, nice to see you.
Dan Weeks.
Hey, Dan, how you doing? Good to see you.
Kristen Mendoza.
Hey, Kristen, how are you?
Josephine.
Josephine, nice to see you. How are you?
Hi.
John. Hey.
Willett, how are you? I remember you.
Yeah.
Hi, Marilyn.
Nice to see you. How are you? All right. Sorry I'm a little late.
It's good to see you there.
Part-time parking. Good
Every
sign.
city.
Good sign of local business.
Let me change my camera so you can see
You're
your
early by time. What's that?
Early by campaign time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, great. Thanks for coming out. How should we start?
Well, sure.
I wasn't sure.
Dan, are you going to give a quick introduction here?
Sure.
And then we'll turn it over to John to say a little bit about himself, a little bit about the campaign that we're building. We'd like to go around after that and give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves and the business that they're working with or founded. And then, we're going to turn to kind of like an open-ended question format where we're going to talk a little bit about what challenges are entrepreneurs facing here in New Hampshire and how can the federal government support their success. We'd love to hear from you all.
All right, well, I'm glad to be informal host. Our friend Greg Chenoweth is out of state today and asked me to step up. I was looking forward to being here anyway. But thank you very much, Congressman Delaney, for being here with us today to talk with local business folks and entrepreneurs about some of the what's working and what's not when it comes to interfacing as we necessarily do with government at all levels. I think we're very fortunate to have with us Congressman John Delaney from Virginia, who is noted as a business leader. As you probably know from reading his bio or hearing about him, he was a very successful business leader at an early age. I think youngest CEO of a company that went public on the New York Stock Exchange. No small feat there. And after many years in business, transitioned into public service, serving in the Congress from, I'm sorry, I said Virginia, Maryland. One of the, I think, the largest congressional district in Maryland.
Yes, indeed.
Covering a large swath of the state. And we thank you for your service there. And I believe you were also the first announced presidential candidate.
Yeah.
Decided not to play the dance, but to step right out.
The entrepreneur in me.
There we go.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of seeing you at least 2 or 3 times on the trail, and I know you've made many visits to New Hampshire. We appreciate you gracing our state and letting this retail politics vision continue, where we get to vet the candidates many times. It's a unique honor we have. So I think the discussion here, I won't take any more time. I can say just a word about the business I represent, but we're excited to hear from you, Congressman, and share some of our own experiences. Just to wrap up my intro, I'm, as I mentioned, with Revision Energy. We're an employee-owned solar company, clean energy company that employs about 260 people. Most of our work in New Hampshire and in Maine, also Massachusetts, a regional company. And I can speak more in a few minutes about some of the challenges we see, but needless to say, energy is an interesting, dynamic space. We call it the solar coaster because regulations are always changing, even week to week sometimes, and plenty of challenges that brings, but plenty of opportunity as we, as a nation, try to address the climate challenge. So I'm grateful to be here with all of you, and let's turn right over to Congressman Delaney. Thank you.
What's funny, and thanks for that nice introduction today. I always tell young people who come to see me, often more because I was an entrepreneur than a politician. I always tell them that if I were young and thinking about business, I'd go into the energy business. Because there's no question, in my opinion, that how we produce, distribute, and conserve energy in 30 years is going to be entirely different than what we do today. And it's a big industry, and that means it's going to change a lot. And so therein lies a lot of opportunities. But so I was an entrepreneur. I'll just give you a little background about myself. And thank you all for being here. So I was born in North Jersey, a blue-collar kid. My dad was a construction worker. Neither of my parents went to college. I went to Columbia University and then Georgetown for law school, where I met my wife. Best thing that ever happened to me. And and I've been blessed with 4 daughters, and we've been happily married for 29 years. But while I was in law school, I figured out I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I was working, I had to work during school, and I was working at a little law firm that had like 5 or 6 lawyers, but half their time they were practicing law, the other half their time they were like investing in businesses. And I was a law clerk there, and I said, this is really cool, this is what I want to do. And so after I graduated law school, I practiced law for a year, and then myself and 2 law school classmates, we bought a little business, and it was in the home healthcare industry. And we didn't know anything about the home healthcare industry, like 0. But this business was for sale for $15,000 in the Washington Post, back when they had classified ads. And each of us could come up with $5,000. So that's how I got into business. So I bought this little company and I ran it. It was terrible, terrible business. I turned it around, sold it, made a little bit of money. And, but I saw an opportunity in that business. And the opportunity was that I had a very hard time getting a loan when I was running that company. This was in the early 90s. And then First Lady Hillary Clinton was proposing a fairly transformative change to the healthcare system. And as a result, no banks would lend on healthcare to healthcare companies. They were small unless they were established. How you doing?
How's it going?
Good. Got a seat here? If anyone needs one. So I started a company basically to lend money to the kind of companies the kind of company I had, a small to mid-sized healthcare company, because I thought there was a shortage of capital for those type of businesses. And that turned out to be a good idea. And that business took off. And it started in 1993, and I took it public in 1996. And then at the time, I was the youngest CEO in the history of the New York Stock Exchange. I was 33 years old. And then I ran that company as a public company for 3 years. And then I sold it to GE Capital, which was back then, General Electric used to have this massive lending business. And my business became their healthcare lending business, which went on to become a huge business for them. And I took a year off, and my wife and I got involved in philanthropy. We started a foundation, but I was, I guess 36 at the time, and I still had an entrepreneurial itch. So I started another business, a company called Capital Source. And the focus of Capital Source was to be a lender to small to mid-sized businesses, but have an industry-focused model, like I had done with healthcare. Because this was again around 2000, I had this view that the big banks were either focusing on consumer lending, in other words, mortgages and credit cards, or they were focusing on making loans to big companies that they could do investment banking with, and that they weren't lending money to mid-sized companies. And that most of the jobs in this country are created by mid-sized companies. Right? Big companies don't actually create a lot of jobs. They buy other companies and typically lay people off. Nothing wrong with it, just the way capitalism works, but that's kind of what happens with big companies. Small companies, which employ 2/3 of the employees in this country, are great, but most of them don't grow. So if you look at like your dry cleaner down the street, it's got 4 people working in it. It had 4 people working in it 10 years ago. Right? Those things employ most of the people in this country, but they typically don't grow. All the new jobs in this country are created when a small company breaks out. So like my business, which went from a startup in 2000 to having 1,000 employees 4 years later. Right? That's where all the jobs get created. And those companies grow really fast. They outgrow their local community banks, which are great, but typically get a little freaked out if things grow too fast. They get scared, and they're not big enough for big banks. So I saw a niche there to finance fast-growing companies, but to do it as an industry specialist. So we built a retail business, we had a healthcare business, we built a technology business, we built a defense contracting business, and several others, all focused on financing these companies. And that company took off. I took it public 3 years later, and I ran that company until I decided to dedicate the rest of my life to public service. And during the time I ran that business, we financed 5,000 small to mid-sized companies. We had 22 offices around the country. So I basically spent my whole business career traveling around the country, meeting with small to mid-sized businesses, them telling me their dreams. I'm going to get from here to here, and this is all things I got to do, and I need a loan to do it. And me and my team, we would sit there and decide if we thought we could make the loan. My business motto is the original path to yes. Right? Because oftentimes someone gives you a plan and says, this is what I want to do, and this is what I need. I'm like, well, we can help get you there, but we may not be able to do it exactly that way. So oftentimes, we were known for our creativity. So I spent my whole career basically hanging out with entrepreneurs and being one myself, and I loved it. It was fabulous. And as an elected official, one of the things I've tried to do is stimulate the entrepreneurial economy. Because I think the way we solve all problems in this country is these smart people go out there and innovate a solution. I think climate change is ultimately going to be solved by innovation. I think we're going to have to figure out how to suck 30% of the carbon out of the atmosphere, and the United States of America should unleash a massive wave of innovation in negative emissions technologies and direct air capture and things like that. It could be the industry of the future, and we should have it here. So a lot of my wiring is like, how do we create jobs through entrepreneurship? But how do we also make sure entrepreneurship is broadly shared? Because one of the problems we have in our country right now is it's way too concentrated. It's concentrated geographically, and it's concentrated in other ways. Mostly white men get most of the venture capital, right? There's not enough diversity. Women aren't supported enough. But the geographic concentration is unbelievable. Last year in our country, 80% of the venture capital was invested in 50 counties. 50 out of 3,100 counties. So if you view venture capitalists as the smart money, I'm not saying they are, but let's just assume they are for a second, that are making all the big bets about all the big winners in the future. They're making those bets in 50 places. That doesn't say a lot of great things about broad-based economic growth. So that has also been something I've been trying to tackle. I've been thinking about how, from a regulatory environment, regulations often hurt small companies much more than they hurt big companies. Big companies hire teams of people to deal with regulations. Small companies often have a hard time. It's the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem that I think has to be fostered, and I think we need elected officials who understand it and actually care about it. So, but the best way for people like me to understand it better is to talk to folks like you. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of your businesses, and then maybe we could just have a conversation about what's important.
I'll kick us off because I'm not actually a business owner.
Okay.
So I work for the University of New Hampshire for cooperative extension, doing community and economic development work. And for the most part, my work focuses on Concord North, working with rural communities.
Super.
Last year, I identified entrepreneurship as a big gap in our rural communities. So started an initiative in Concord called 1 Million Cups that brings entrepreneurs together to talk with each other, to present, to try to build our entrepreneurial ecosystem in central New Hampshire. Joined a group to start a makerspace in Concord. And right now working on starting an incubator program in Concord that doesn't have a space because we've had trouble supporting those in that area, to run businesses through, starting youth entrepreneurship initiatives there. So I have a lot of initiatives and also like to meet and hear from entrepreneurs and share my experience working with rural communities and the challenges that they face, especially for central New Hampshire and in our North Country.
Super.
So those are the communities I focus on.
Great. Beautiful.
My name is Robert Tanway. I actually rent an office here for New England Marketing Efficiency to market for small businesses. They're often neglected. And I also have environmental passions, which is why I started a company to pay for it. The founder of Emissions Tax, I've met with Phil from Revision, great outfit you guys have. Which basically price pollution, lower income tax, and fund liabilities like Social Security, Medicare can be done. And
With a carbon tax.
All emissions should be taxed, but carbon tax, I actually don't agree with the way that it's done. I think that's in fact, Exxon has put $1 million into carbon tax kind of to shield themselves from any of the damage that they've done, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
There just needs to be more incentives for people not to pollute than pollute. And I have a couple things I'd like to share when time comes around.
Oh, great.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Jenny Share, Aaron is my husband Aaron. We run Two Share Brewing here in Manchester, just a few blocks that way.
Cool.
So we have more experience in physical construction. I know more now than I think I ever thought I would 2 or 3 years ago.
And that into your place.
Yes, exactly. So we've been open since the middle of December.
Your mom was there.
Yep. Yes, it's a family affair.
That's great. You guys moved from where?
Maryland.
Maryland. That was
Yeah, we were in Summer Spring.
That was it. Yeah. Cool. How's business?
It's good. Yeah.
The beer was good. That's an important part.
That's an important part of the process.
Welcome to New Hampshire.
Right. Exactly.
My name is Theo Groh. I'm on a small company called Wheelhouse Web Solutions, and we are actually a very small business. myself and 2 partners, and we market to small businesses and small nonprofits. As you mentioned, it's a very underserved group of businesses. Medium-sized and large businesses have no problem paying for large-scale marketing, but finding custom solutions for these mom and pop or sole proprietor businesses that actually really works for them is what we do and what we're passionate about.
Great.
Hi, my name is Chris Sharma. I'm the host of the New Hampshire Business Show. We are a podcast dedicated to building a community for businesses in New Hampshire. There's a problem with, if you're not a giant company, you don't have the money for advertising, small businesses have an issue. So what I did is I've begun the last 3 years creating a platform so that some people in the room can have a show. If you are a brand new business, you need marketing, you need a platform, I've created one for small business to get out there and get seen. So I spend a lot of time talking to entrepreneurs all over the state, from coast to Vermont, and then up, and so we're building a strong community here. That's what I do.
Great, good for you.
Mention a little bit about what I do. Revision Energy is maybe one of those classic mid-sized businesses. We've been growing 20 to 25% year over year. Been in business 16 years now. Certainly see an emerging market for clean energy. Solar is our core business, but we've expanded to complementary technologies like electric vehicle charging, battery systems, LED lighting, etc.
Are you building charging stations?
We are. Plenty of challenges that we can get into. Workforce, a very substantial one. An uneven and uncertain regulatory environment.
Yeah.
Another big one, as the primary tax incentive for solar is scheduled to sunset over the next 3 years as compared to permanent energy subsidies in the fossil fuel area for over a century. So yeah, it's a dynamic space. But
How many charging stations do you have?
Last year we put in about 50. We've done hundreds. Most charging is done at homes overnight. But now with the Volkswagen emission scandal settlement money finally being deployed in New Hampshire and neighboring states, we expect to see there's currently 4 DC fast chargers in the whole state of New Hampshire. You need to charge quickly compared to dozens in Vermont and Mass.
You only have 4?
4 in the whole state. And I use them, I know them well.
You know where they all are.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the economic model of a charging station?
Interestingly, most of the chargers that are deployed that are public are level 2, so they're mid-level, 20 miles of charge an hour roughly. Most of them are free.
Yeah. You
So
park your car and
businesses,
you plug it in or something like that.
like breweries are putting in chargers to attract customers, providing $1 worth of charge over a couple hours on average in attracting business. Then you've got networks like ChargePoint, EVgo, which are charging more meaningful, $10 for a session of fast charging over at Whole Foods in Bedford, for instance. Are they making much money? Not at this stage. In places like California where you have meaningful EV penetration, there is a good business model.
You make them work.
Yeah.
For fast charge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Good for you. That's cool. Thanks again.
Hi, Kristen Mendoza. I'm a business law attorney at Bernstein Shore Law Firm. Mostly focused in Portland, but we have a nice office here in Manchester. I've been practicing about 18 years, mostly in large law firms, working with small businesses and startups, tech startups, a lot of, and after many years working with entrepreneurs, I went out and started my own law practice about 3 years ago to change the billing model for small businesses, doing flat fee instead of hourly, because a lot of entrepreneurs and startups can't afford big law firm rates. So did that, grew it to a point where my clients needed more services like trust and estates work and commercial litigation, and ended up getting acquired at a big law firm again. But still doing my flat fee
cycle of life.
Yeah, the whole cycle, right? But still doing the flat fee billing and still working with small businesses here in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So access to capital, huge pain point for my clients, and I spend a lot of time working with them to develop plans around getting private funding through angels, and it's mostly angel activity here in the state because we're not one of the 50 counties, and we don't get the same penetration or attention that Boston and Cambridge get for VC dollars. So.
Great.
Mhm.
Doctor?
Nurse practitioner.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. My name is Josephine Jacks, and I am a nurse practitioner. I live in Mass, but I moved down here 5 months ago. I moved to have a clinic. I moved my clinic, not my house. I still live in Mass. So the reason why I moved to Massachusetts, to New Hampshire, is because I have been, I was a nurse for 20 years, and I've been a nurse practitioner for 6 years, and I am a little bit intoxicated with the healthcare system where you see patients every 15 minutes, in and out, and I really like to take my time and see my patients and see what's going on with them thoroughly before I treat them. So I had that vision of creating my own work. So I came to New Hampshire because it's easier to practice as a nurse practitioner on your way in New Hampshire than Massachusetts. You need a supervising physician in
Yeah,
Massachusetts.
but not here.
Not here.
That's
So
interesting.
I took advantage of that. And I found a little place in Nashua, which is right on the border. of
Yeah,
Massachusetts.
sure.
Yeah. So that's what I've been doing.
And what's your practice?
I'm doing a family practice or primary care, but I start seeing kids from 15 years of age.
You start seeing,
I start at 15, yeah, because I'm actually trained to be a family nurse practitioner. Yeah, I'm originally from the islands, Caribbean, Haiti, and I've been in the United States for 34 years. I was in Florida first, then moved to Mass.
Good.
So it's kind of challenging though to be in here because I don't really know too many people.
Right.
I have not really been able to find the patients, the caseload that I need to survive. So I'm living on roads for now for the past 5 months. And I'm also certified to give treatments to the people with opioid use disorders, which you guys seem to have a crisis going on in New Hampshire. So I have that certification so that could, help provide this type of services to this type of patients if I find them.
Right.
So far, I haven't found two. So.
Great. Okay, terrific.
Okay.
I'm Griffin Neal. I'm co-owner of First Look Advertising, and we're a small digital marketing agency. We work with mom and pop businesses, small to medium sized businesses, just because a lot of other marketing firms, they have a minimum budget. You have to start at $5,000 or something just to work with them. We work with budgets as low as $300 just to really help them kind of get their name out. And being in this rural area, it's hard to find a lot of new either customers or patients just because there's only 5,000 people within 10 square miles or something if you're up north. And so that's really one thing. And with everyone going on the computers or their iPhones all the time, being on the computer, social media, Facebook and stuff, is a little more graspable for millennials and stuff instead of newspaper ads or television ads. So that's something I've always grown up with it, and so I kind of learned how to do that, and then from there just really figured out how to turn this into a business. And
how long have you had the company for?
A year and 4 months now.
Cool.
Yeah. So
how's it going?
It's good. We still have most of our clients. We have lost one client from the time we started until now.
What kind of businesses are they mostly?
Medical practices.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place called Clean Take in Concord, and it's really good holistic foods and cancer fighting foods. A lot of trade labor and stuff like that, HVAC, roofing, things along that line.
You just putting out some digital advertising for them just to get their name out there.
Yeah, and it all depends on what they want. I can sit there and offer here's a package, this is how much it costs, but I go in and I sit down with them and be like, no, we can do Google for you, but you'd work better on Facebook. So we really dissect what they need and what their challenges are. Because some people, they want to grow and open another location. Some people just want to, get more business from March to June or something like that. And so we don't do big contracts. We're just we do month to month. Right. And just so anytime if we can't show you results, get rid of us. Right. But here we are doing work for you. And so
great.
I'm the other co-owner.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
You guys are a team.
Yeah, it's just two of us.
That's great.
Yep.
Good for you. Congratulations. Yeah, that's great. All right, so what do you think some of the issues are that inhibit entrepreneurs here in New Hampshire, or anywhere for that matter?
Young people.
Really?
Workforce.
Yeah, workforce. The unemployment's low. So people are working.
More other businesses.
saw that issue, I
Yeah.
do some landscaping too, and they're having a hard time finding physical labor. A lot of people wanna stay cozied up in their office or, shop. I think, because I saw a lot of marketing, and a lot of marketing you do Facebook, right? Or Instagram.
Instagram, Facebook, it's on the
So like, what I see is large tech companies have cornered the market, taking money away from small newspapers. Many other newspapers get bought up, and they're able to siphon those funds out of communities that would normally go to local papers, and now you're putting it to Facebook. And so I think that's, as a web developer, that's the big issue. Facebook has been crushing web development, and then Wix is coming through, and anyone can make a website, but that's just one of the issues.
Yeah. So workforce is a big issue. Are you trying to hire people?
At the moment, no.
Yeah.
Just with us, we're able to do it, but that is something I want to do, and having like an office for that, to have people, a lot of people that are in like tech or like the internet kind of businesses, I mean, they'll go to like Boston or New York and go to like these bigger places just because, they want to live in the city. There's not as much to do up here for them for some reason.
Right.
Like, people, like kids like my age, like they want to be like interested, they want to be doing stuff, they want nightlife, and if you're not like in downtown Manchester or like at UNH or something, like that's at Portsmouth, like being in the rural area, which I love living in the woods, but for other people who want to work up here, it's more of a place to raise a family instead.
Right. So it's a real issue getting workers.
We're seeing a real crunch. That's the biggest bottleneck to grow.
You have 260 people, you said?
160, about 25 openings right now, most of them in the trades. So that tends to be younger folks, folks who, a lot of our electricians and installers do have college degrees, but others don't. And yet I think society says that there's one route to success, which is that 4-year college degree.
Way too much emphasis on that.
Yeah. So we see, and that'll continue to be a great need in this country, in terms of clean energy transition itself. There's about 250,000 jobs in solar today, more than all fossil fuels combined. That needs to grow to millions of jobs. Those are trades jobs. We need to
They're good jobs.
folks. They do pay well, good living wages. But with the out-migration of young people in New Hampshire, with the highest cost of college, many of all 50 states in the state, highest student debt load of all 50 states, more than half our young people leave for college, and then a lot of them don't come back. So that's, the aging of the state is a particular issue. But generally, I think that need to attract more people to really hold up this option of a career in the trades. And then there are minor regulatory, not so minor, but rather arcane matters, such as until just last year, you needed a ratio of 1 licensed electrician per electrical apprentice. Now that may be reasonable if you're wiring a building, but if you're laying thousands of solar panels on a roof, not everybody needs to do the conduit run and the electrical interconnect. They did raise that in New Hampshire to 2 to 1. Overnight, we hired 12 people. If they would raise that to 3 to 1, which we think is reasonable, we would hire many more.
So the ratio now is 2
apprentices to 1 licensed electrician.
Yeah, got it.
And so these kinds of
great more leverage.
Were designed with a whole different framework in mind.
And who pushes for that kind of licensure?
So through the professional boards and associations, so there's some protection there that we see. Approval came from the state executive council and the governor, so there is that governmental role.
Yeah. That's interesting. So it's really hard to get workers.
It is.
And what do the electricians get paid who work in your kind of stuff? If you don't mind?
So a young guy at 20 can earn 15 to 17 out of the gate.
As an apprentice?
As an apprentice, and we created an in-house electrical apprentice school.
Wow.
We have about 55 apprentices who are, we're funding their education, their 4-year certification, and...
Is that what it is, 4-year certification?
That's right.
If you're not in the union?
That's right.
The union folks get certified through the union, right?
But it's a similar time
to
reach that certification.
Got it.
And once they're certified, they're making well over 25.
Yeah.
So the Amazon's starting at $17.25 to Delivery Drive. I just saw that in Nashua. So I think a lot of people don't realize that you're competing, small businesses in New Hampshire are competing against publicly traded companies for labor, they have, so say when mandatory insurance comes out, small businesses can't afford mandatory insurance. Verizon can, Amazon can, and so I think that's often overlooked.
Regulations generally, as I said, hurt small businesses. And I'm not saying we don't need regulations, we do, particularly things that protect consumers. But a lot of this stuff really does disproportionately hurt small businesses, right? Because big companies can afford it, they can spread it out, they can.
And they're lobbying for it too. They have the resources to lobby. Like Amazon moved their headquarters to Virginia, which is really their lawyer, so really close to DC. I believe in the lobbying efforts, and that's kind of disheartening to me. So I write a lot about big corporations. I've sued Amazon.
Oh, what'd you sue over?
The fake shipping scam. I made a video, and so my issues are, and you'd appreciate this, is all these big corporations, tech companies use these things called class action waivers, and also other mechanisms of contracts for labor law. And so they use these, and I'm calling it micro-torting. So Amazon, when you go on, it's a computer, and your website designer can test that. It's just database, and they can make it so that you don't see the product. Maybe as a seller,
right,
my product doesn't get shown.
They should promote it.
And so I've documented the big shipping fraud. I sued them in small claims case. They put the ex-governor's husband's law firm against me, and I didn't win. And a simple thing that they could do, because they didn't look at the evidence, I had tons of it, is like California is bar lawyers from small claims. But the New Hampshire bar, and however it happened, allows lawyers in New Hampshire in small claims, so a guy like me only resorts to go against a legal team. I sued for $5,000. I don't know the price, but I think that the lawyer got like $15,000, $25,000.
Right. They just don't want to. Yeah, I mean, so you really got to. There has been tremendous consolidation. I mean, I see a lot in rural America. The consolidation in the. I mean, if you go to a rural town, you see that a little bit here in New Hampshire, but particularly in really farming places like Iowa and Nebraska, these kind of places. It used to be that there was a locally owned grocery store. There was a locally owned hardware store. There was a locally owned seed company. There was the farm. And then you would have a locally owned kind of production operation. If it's an area that raises a lot of pigs, you locally owned slaughterhouse, all that kind of stuff. And what's happened over the last several decades is there's been consolidation of everything but the farm. So the grocery store is not locally owned, it's owned by Walmart or someone, right? The hardware store, same thing. The seed company is owned by the agribusiness. The production is owned by the agribusiness. And in reality, the riskiest part of the continuum is the farm, right? Because that's subject to weather and price volatility. Where the other parts of the businesses are pretty consistent. And so in a way, there's been this consolidation of all the most stable businesses, the owners who don't live in the town anymore. Whereas 40, 50 years ago, the people in the grocery store, the seed company, the hardware store, and the production facility actually lived in the town. And so the returns on those capital stayed in the community. And now it's kind of been consolidated out. And it's really been tough on a lot of these communities.
And they're even buying out the farms contracts for their produce.
Well, but they don't buy the farms, right? Because they don't want to be in the farm. The farming business itself is too risky. They want to basically control everything around it. And then it kind of becomes heads they win, tails the farmer loses.
Sounds fair.
So, but it stifled a lot of small business groups. So we got to think about what the new businesses are going to be. But at the same time, there's all these, like breweries. Like this year, and I don't know what the number here is in New Hampshire.
I think it's out to 80 at last count, either open or in planning.
Yeah. I mean, it's extraordinary what's happened, the number of breweries around this country. It's a whole industry no one thought existed. 20 years ago, people said that's not business. I go to a bar, I get a beer, whatever. Like this whole concept of what you didn't exist. So there are things going on, solar, etc. The economy does transition. You just got to make sure you've got the right environment for those businesses to thrive. And it comes down to basic stuff, like you said, workforce training, regulations that make it hard.
I think both student debt and healthcare make it really hard for young people to start businesses.
Yes.
So of my 2 business partners, there's 3 of us, I'm the only one doing this full time, so I can afford to take the risk. My wife and I just finished paying down our student loans. I got healthcare on the exchange. I used to have healthcare through her work. But for my 2 business partners, the biggest thing that's preventing them from quitting their day jobs and doing this full time is healthcare and student loan debt. I think especially student loan debt ties young people to these large corporations because they need to have a high enough salary that's regular enough. They become super risk averse.
Right.
They can't take out business loans because their credit and their ability to take on more debt is a real challenge.
For ABC Corporation, we have all the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use it. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I use the word shackles you. That's really what it does. Like, so I think back about when I started my first business. So I was a couple years out of law school. My wife and I just got married. We were going to start a young family, and I wanted to start this business. And an absolute critical decision that we made, sitting there between the 2 of us, was that she was working at a law firm and she had health care. So I could leave my firm and start this business and we could have our first child and what we had. And I look back at that decision, I say, well, what if my wife April was working at a nonprofit, which she does now? What if that nonprofit didn't offer health care because they had 8 or 9 people? And we were using my health care. I might not have made that decision. Like, because I would have said, what the heck are we going to do? We're having this, we're going to have a family, And I wouldn't have started my business, created thousands of jobs and all that stuff. So I actually think this notion of having portable health care, basic health care is right, is incredibly pro-entrepreneur. Because I really think a lot of people are just kind of stuck and look at that and don't think they can replace their healthcare model, right? And they don't want to go start a business. And the same thing with student debt. Because like my dad was a union electrician, so he had great healthcare. But he also lived at a time where most people had one job. So it probably made sense to tie healthcare to your job back then. People had one job, they did it their whole life. So the way we wanted to make sure more people had health insurance was we created tax incentives for companies to offer health care. But we also, that was at a time when people basically had that one job. But I think one of my daughters might have 10 jobs. And we're going to have to be a very dynamic economy. People are going to have to be reskilled, retrained, and I think tons of jobs will get created and tons of jobs will get disrupted. I mean, I think the story of the next 20 or 30 years is massive job disruption, massive job creation, kind of happening in parallel. But there's some problems with it. The jobs that are created are often not the jobs that are disrupted. So if you look at the whole chart of the country, oh yeah, we'll disrupt 20 million jobs, we'll create 20 million jobs, but are they going to be in the same places? And are they going to go to the same people? That's the issue. And so we got to think of how do we create a dynamic where people can be mobile and nimble in this dynamic world. And then you say to yourself, okay, what inhibits mobility in this nimbleness? Well, it's often debt, healthcare, and skills training. That's kind of how I think about it.
Would you talk more about healthcare?
Sure. So what I would do, so as president, the first thing I do in my first 100 days is fix the Affordable Care Act, right? Because I want a universal healthcare system, as do other people, but we have to be realistic. That's not going to happen in 100 days. Reforming healthcare is a big job. So the first thing I would do is fix the Affordable Care Act, and there's ways of doing that. Because I think the Affordable Care Act was a good step forward, but it had a real structural flaw with it. And the structural flaw was based on lobbying. And it's something that a lot of people, I know that's a big surprise to people. But you all know how the Affordable Care Act worked. They had it expanded Medicaid, which was great. That's the best thing it did. It protected pre-existing conditions and all that stuff. But then it had these exchanges. And the exchanges were actually a good idea. But they had one fatal flaw. And the fatal flaw is that as part of passing the law, we said, if you're over 55, but under 65, because when you're 65, you get Medicare. So if you're over 55 and under 65 and you join an exchange, then you, by law, can only be charged 3 times the cost of the cheapest policy the exchange offers. The reason that was put in place is because the AARP represents people when they turn 55, not 65. And they wanted to make sure people over 55 but under 65, the 10 years before Medicare, had low-cost health care, which is an admirable goal. The problem with that goal is that on a statistical basis, people over 55 but under 65, their health care costs are 5 to 6 times the health care costs of a young, healthy person. Right? They're 5 to 6 times your health care costs. So when you're running these exchanges, now I'm 56 now. So if I joined an exchange, they could only charge me 3 times what they charge you. Yet statistically speaking, my healthcare costs are 6 times yours. So if you're running that exchange and you've got to subsidize me, what does that do? It means I raise the price on you. And you sit there as a young person and say, hey, I'm pretty healthy, I'm invincible. What the heck am I going to pay all this money for my health insurance? I'm going to go insure and I'm going to pay the fee. So it created these pools that were sicker than the money coming in would cover, which is why all the exchanges failed. So the way to solve that problem is to allow people over 55 to buy into Medicare and get them out of the exchanges. Because then the exchange will offer you a cheaper price and you'll get back in. But that's what I would do in my first 100 days. But that's kind of a temporary fix. So I don't want to sell that as like my big main healthcare plan. But that's something like, as a responsible leader, I would fix right away to stabilize what we got. But then I would talk about what's better. So this is what I would do. I'd leave Medicare alone because Medicare works and people like it. And it's the only part of our healthcare system that works in many ways, I think. And then I'd create a new program that you get from you're born to you're 65. And recognizing that over 65 you go to Medicare. And you get it as a right of citizenship. And you don't have to pay anything for it. It's a basic health care package you get. And I would roll Medicaid into that because Medicaid is kind of a screwy program. Right? Medicaid is actually the largest health insurance plan in the country. Every state has their own. And they vary dramatically in quality. Like yours in New Hampshire, by the way, is not particularly good. In case you haven't noticed that. But I'd roll that in. So everyone would then walk around with a basic government plan. And its minimum benefits would be similar to the Affordable Care Act. So if you're between jobs, you have health care. If you're poor, you have health care. If you're a 23-year-old and you age off your parents' plan, you have health care. You want to start a business, you have health care. Everyone's got it. But what I wouldn't do is say, but that's the only choice you have. Because I think that's a bad idea. First of all, the American people want choices. That's who we are. We're wired to want choices. We're not a great one-size-fits-all country. Some countries are good at that. We're not that good at that. I would model my plan after the German system, which is called a mixed model system. So under Delaney healthcare plan, you got healthcare as a right. So you'd all have this healthcare plan. But you'd also be able to say, I've got my basic government healthcare plan, but I would like some more options. Right? I would like more flexibility in doctors, IC, and all that stuff. So I'm going to buy a supplemental plan, which is what Medicare beneficiaries do. So Medicare beneficiaries get a basic government plan, but most of them buy private supplemental plans that give them more options. And I would do that. I would allow there to be a private supplemental market that would allow individuals to supplement their basic plan. Which doesn't mean they don't get basic health care as a right, they do. But they could buy in the private insurance market more options. And I think that's the right policy for 2 reasons. The first is we do want choices. If we as a Democratic Party, and I'm running as Democratic nominee, say that you got one choice and it's from the government, we're going to lose a lot of elections. Because even though our healthcare system is screwy, if you go to the American people who have health insurance and say you like it, 70% of them like it. So why do we want to say we're going to take all of your health insurance? But there's another issue that's a matter of economics that's really important, and it's important for people in the healthcare business, is that right now Medicaid only pays 80% of cost. So let's say all of us got together and started a hospital here in New Hampshire, and all of our patients were Medicaid. We would lose 20%, and we would close very quickly. Medicare, which is the second largest health insurance, let's say we had that hospital and we said, no, we're not going to take Medicaid, we're just going to take Medicare patients, 100% Medicare patients. Medicare only pays 95% of costs. So if we were running that hospital, we'd lose 5% and we would close too, not as quickly, but we'd still close. Private insurance pays 115% of costs. So if we ran a hospital and we only had private insurance, we'd make 15% on the bottom line. That's the economic model of healthcare. And so if you go to Elliott Hospital, for example, where I've spent a lot of time, I've done a visit there, and you ask the administrator of Elliott Hospital, you guys all know Elliott Hospital, right, the hospital system, and you say to them, last year, if all of your bills from commercial insurance were paid by Medicare at Medicare rates, how would that go for you? And they're like, well, we would close. So my point is, we have substantial evidence to suggest that if the government is the only payer of health care, that they never will pay enough. Why won't they pay enough? Because politicians determine how much they pay. And politicians have to deal with budgets. And politicians are always looking to cut healthcare costs. So that's why I favor a mixed model, where everyone gets healthcare as a right, but they're also allowed to buy supplemental markets in the private insurance market. Because that fundamentally puts a lot more money in the healthcare system, and in many ways supports the whole healthcare system in this country. So that's why I think my healthcare plan is the best, and I would pay for that whole system. So my plan is fully paid for. What I just described to you costs $5 billion to make happen over 10 years. Great healthcare is a right for every American, with a mixed model where people buy these private plans to supplement their government plan. I'd pay for that by getting rid of the corporate deductibility of healthcare. Because the corporate deductibility of healthcare is the #1 corporate tax exemption in this country. And what that means is, we've got this weird system in this country where if you work for a big company and you get health care from them, let's say it costs $10,000 a year, you don't pay tax on that benefit. If your employee gives you a $10,000 housing allowance, you've got to pay tax on that. But if they give you $10,000 health care, you don't pay tax. And the company gets to deduct it from their taxes. So this healthcare corporate exemption gets this double treatment in the tax world. So I would end that. And that raises all the money to pay for my system. But you also don't need that exemption anymore, because people will have these portable plans. They'll have their basic government plan. They'll show up to work for the big company and they'll have their health care. Now the big company may negotiate a group supplemental plan for them to get other options. Long-winded answer, but that would be my health care.
That's cool. It's a version of Medicare for all.
Right, but the problem with Medicare for all is that it's basically a single payer system. And the problem with that is what I just discussed. It is, and I'll say it very directly. I admire what Medicare for all is trying to achieve, which is universal health care, right? Because I just described why we do those. But there's both a naive aspect to it, and there's also a misleading aspect to it, right? And what I mean by that is the effort to seem so pure. In other words, the evil of private insurance. They are basically putting our healthcare at the whims of politicians and betting that they're always going to vote to pay enough in healthcare. And we have no evidence that they ever do that. In fact, in New Hampshire here, you know one of the reasons there's such an opioid crisis in the state is because Medicaid reimbursement for mental health is so low that no providers take it. So you theoretically have a Medicaid mental health benefit in this state. If you go on the website, it'll say, yeah, we cover mental health. But good luck finding a provider that will take reimbursement half of what Vermont pays. So if you were a mental health provider, why would you practice in New Hampshire when you could do it in Vermont and get paid twice as much for doing the same thing?
That's federal?
Medicaid is state.
Oh, okay. So that's a state decision.
But listen, it's the same with Medicare, right? All these hospitals say Medicare doesn't pay enough, but we take it, of course, because it's the largest plan, but if we didn't have private insurance, we would close. So that's why I think it's a better plan.
Thank you.
Healthcare is complicated. Our president has figured that out finally, but it is. I mean, it's the biggest industry in our country, right? It's almost 1/5 of the U.S. economy. Literally, almost every dollar out of 5 we spend is healthcare. You will work with a lot of healthcare companies, you know that. I bet they're 20% of your clients. Yeah, it's 20% of the economy. You don't throw the whole thing out overnight and start from scratch. That's just not the way the world works.
So I wanted to ask you 2 questions about college affordability and college debt. One is, I think there's kind of 2 separate problems, and we've heard various people address them in different ways. I think college debt for folks who have it currently existing is really holding back our
Yep.
economy, whether it's consumer spending or new business creation. And then even if you deal with debt forgiveness or whatever you want to do to deal with the debt, you still have incredible rising costs for colleges. Now, I don't understand how every year the cost of college goes up. So how do we address both college costs and then also the debt that we already have? We have senior citizens still paying off
Crazy.
college debt.
So you basically got three questions there, right? What do you do with all the kids with too much debt? What do you do with new kids coming up? And then what do you? And when I say kids with too much debt, a lot of them, as you said, are almost seniors or something, right? So what do you do with the people with too much debt? What do you do with the kids going to school? And then how do you control college costs? So let's deal with college costs first. College costs is a complicated thing because there's some reason college costs that have gone up are good and some aren't good. So for example, 20, 30 years ago, colleges didn't have IT budgets. They weren't hacked. They didn't have all this personal data of all these students subject to being stolen. So colleges have basically had to invest a fair amount in information technology platforms, which is a new cost that didn't exist. There's no really offset to it. It didn't really add a tremendous amount of productivity in the way colleges are run, unlike industry, where it actually took human beings out of the equation. So you spent a bunch of money on technology, but it actually reduced jobs, so it didn't have to cost companies more, they saved money. Colleges haven't been the same way. They haven't actually taken human beings out of the classrooms. They've just had to invest a lot in technology. That's been a new cost, and that's a legitimate cost. The other thing, unfortunately, we have shooting on college campuses, and all colleges have invested in massive security. They didn't have to do. You go on a college campus 40, 50 years ago, maybe there was one guard walking around. Now many of these places have police forces, cameras, and all these kind of things. And that's terrible, but it's a reality. That's like a new cost that didn't exist. The other new cost that didn't exist before is research. You know, for every dollar you get from the federal government, you have to match about 40 cents to cover the overhead. So if you work for the university, what school did you went to, you said?
University of New Hampshire.
You're with the university. So if University of New Hampshire applies for a grant to do research in your labs from the NIH, let's say it's a $500,000 grant. They apply, they say, we want to do this research, it's important research, it's important for all variety of reasons, and this is the expenses we're going to pay doing the research, with the investigators, the lab techs, etc. The federal government will give the University of New Hampshire this grant, but the federal government expects University of New Hampshire to pay for the overhead. Because as a taxpayer, you actually want these universities to have some skin in the game. Makes sense, right?
Everybody should, yeah.
Everyone should. So if you're going to get NIH research dollars, the universities have skin in the game. Now, we do a lot more research because we're much more of a STEM-oriented country. And that's put cost, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's put cost on universities. Those are all legitimate reasons. Then there's some reasons that maybe are not so legitimate. They've rebuilt like all these campuses like crazy. You know, they're like shiny, beautiful new buildings here and there, right?
Sports centers.
All this stuff, right? Some sports centers pay for themselves, but Ohio State it pays for itself, right? Because they get a TV contract. But in a lot of schools, they don't get such a big fat TV contract. So there's been a lot of money spent on that. And, you know, the ratio of people engaged in administrative activities at universities to instructors has gone up. I'm not saying that's wrong or right, it's just happened. So that's really the story of education. And I think we should have affirmative policies to encourage schools to really control these costs. For adults that have too much debt, I would do two things. One, I would create more programs for them to refinance their debt out into income repayment programs, right? So a percentage of your income. You need more of those things. So if you go work for Amazon and you become a programmer and you make a ton of money, you pay your loans off fast. But if you go into public service or a teacher or something like that, you're going to pay your loans off over a long period of time because it's a percentage of your income. I would do that. The other thing I would do is, and this you hate even talking about, but it's true. You know, the only debt in this country that's not dischargeable in bankruptcy is student debt. So if you file for bankruptcy in this country, bankruptcy is a process designed to give you a fresh start. Every debt you have can be discharged by a bankruptcy judge. No one wants to file for bankruptcy, but if you do, a judge can take your credit card debt and just get rid of it or reduce it. They can take your mortgage debt, get rid of it, reduce it. If you borrow money to start a business and you borrow it personally and you go into bankruptcy, a bankruptcy judge can say, hey, you need a clean start. We're going to discharge that debt or reduce it. That's the whole point of bankruptcy. No one wants to do it, but that's the whole point of it. The only debt in the United States of America that is not dischargeable in bankruptcy is student loan debt. So if you go into bankruptcy with a lot of student loan debt, the judge looks at it and says, nothing I can do about it.
But they would raise the rates though, like, I mean,
But not a
I
lot.
see what you're saying.
There's been a lot of studies on it.
Okay, I don't know that.
Yeah, and you have to do it the right way. So you have to have provisions like, well, you can't, if you file for bankruptcy within 10 years of graduating, then you can't get it discharged.
You obviously thought of it.
Yeah, but it does raise the rates, there's no question. But see, to me, that's a risk that the society that can insure.
Mhm.
And they say it'll raise the rates like 1/10 of 1%. Right. But the other thing about it is it's not a big issue, but it shows our mentality in some of this stuff. Right? That we've decided that the only debt in this country that's not dischargeable bankruptcy is student debt. Like, okay, who thought of that idea?
A lot of people don't finish their degrees.
That's the biggest problem with
Especially
student debt.
where I'm working, like doing labor.
That's the biggest problem because if we were able to build a house, let's say we got together and said we're going to build a house, and we buy the land, we build a house, and we get 80% of the way through, and we suddenly disagree with each other, we're fighting all the time, and we're like, screw it, we're not going to finish the house. Let's put it for sale. Someone will pay something for it. They buy it, we're going to finish it. So if we borrowed money, we get something for it. But if you get 80% of your degree, not worth a lot, right? And that's a big problem with student debt. So that's what I would do for existing students. And for new students, I would make community college free, and I would lower the rates on student loans. I'm not for a free 4-year college, because A, we can't afford it, and B, it creates an incentive for everyone to go to 4-year college, which I don't think everyone should go to 4-year college. And if we basically say it's free for everyone, then everyone's like, okay, I got to do that because it's free. So I think if you want to go to 4-year college, you should have some skin in the game. But it should be skin that you can get a return on. Right? So lower the rates on student debt and make community college and career and technical training part of public education.
And worth noting, we now see good programs in-state and elsewhere where community college that associates is fully affordable. So
Yeah.
you got half your 4 years.
And that's right. You do that for 2 years, then you go to a 4-year thing. The rates are a little lower. Sure, you got to pay some for it, but think about how much cheaper it went. As opposed to a 4-year college at full rack rate, you do 2 years of community college, then you do 2 years somewhere else. It just cuts it more than that.
Where many of the rural communities that I work with struggle to get federal resources. One of the reasons that we have one of the lowest, I think the lowest poverty rate in the country, and one of the lowest unemployment rates. So those make sense. But one area that they really struggle is getting broadband.
Yes, that's ridiculous.
And a reason is that many federal resources are based at the county level. So all of our counties have broadband, but we have a lot of individual communities that don't, and they can't retain small businesses or entrepreneurs, and they don't qualify for these resources because the federal government looks at these resources at the county level. And how you can help small rural towns that small businesses are leaving, and we haven't figured out how to work with them to access federal resources that actually do exist because they're not qualifying for them, they're not tailored for a state like ours.
Yeah, we got to change how that stuff's administered. Listen, everyone should have broadband access. I mean, imagine being a young person in 2019 and not having high-speed internet. You don't have a shop. So that's part of my infrastructure plan to get more broadband access, change how those dollars are doled out, which is, you nailed it, is a big part of the problem. And it's funny, you get a lot, this is where the communications companies have lobbied very successfully against this, because most infrastructure, water, highways, that kind of stuff is owned by the public. But communications infrastructure is largely owned by private companies. And they don't want the government competing with them. They've been the big people pushing against federal funding of. What's that?
The G, what's his name? The G from Verizon.
Oh, yeah.
The C, whatever it is.
Yeah. So, we gotta have more rural broadband. Absolutely. Great. Yes, sir.
Medicare. There are 32 million people right now on Medicare that work part-time and have no insurance. The president this week announced that he's going to work to eliminate those 32 million people. What will happen to these 32 million people who will no longer have insurance at all? How does that help make America better?
So, he's gonna eliminate 32 million, I didn't follow.
32 million people who are on Medicare now who work part-time.
Right,
So if he eliminates their Medicare,
yeah, you shouldn't do that.
they won't have no insurance.
Yes.
How does that help
Listen,
this country?
you pay for Medicare, you earned it, you get it when you're 65. Pretty simple to me. I think that doesn't obviously help them with healthcare.
Going back to some of the issues you raised around crony capital, as we've talked about, small medium businesses versus very large businesses, like case in point, like telecoms, where we spend, estimates are about $1 trillion a year in tax expenditures. A lot of those are home mortgages, which touch a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of fight to get rid of that, certainly, if that was on the table. But a lot of, in my industry of energy, the estimates are about $27 billion in direct tax subsidies for fossil fuel, oil, gas, and coal
Per year.
per year. Tens of billions more if you start measuring the negative externalities.
The social department, yeah.
Right. How do you go about undoing that system where, in the case of fossil fuels, $300 million in an election cycle in 2016 between campaign donations and lobbying, compared to a few measly million from all renewables put together, and incentives that likewise are dwarfed by fossil fuels? How do you tackle that systemic problem of who has voice in politics and how that tips the playing field in favor of a few large corporations and against entrepreneurs and small businesses?
So, it's a great question. I think there's three things that are really destroying our democracy. One is too much money in politics, which you're getting at. And there's a whole bunch of things we need to do there. Now, we're limited because we have free speech in this country.
A particular jurisprudence around free speech.
What's that?
I would say other advanced democracies have free speech too. They don't necessarily equate political standing.
I totally agree with you. But I just like being really honest with people, right? So we're never going to have a situation where we get money completely out of politics because the Supreme Court for a long period of time has determined that part of free speech is being able to support candidates. But the court has said, for example, like if someone were to give me money, they can only give me $2,800. So they have said that there's not an unlimited right to support candidates at any level, right? Because the law, the McCain-Feingold law that created limits on campaign contributions is constitutional. So what that tells me is we can limit these things. And so really where we've lost the fight here is with the Citizens United decision. Because there's two things in Citizens United that we can fix, even without getting rid of Citizens United. I would like to get rid of Citizens United. I will put my shoulder behind a constitutional amendment to overturn it. I would love for the Supreme Court to overturn it. But I'm not banking on either of those things happening in the short term. Like, I don't think most people think this court's going to overturn it because in many ways the court's gotten more conservative than when it was passed. And constitutional amendments are few and far between. Like, we should have passed the Equal Rights Amendment decades ago. There's no argument against the Equal Rights Amendment. So, but let me tell you what you can do. You can say, okay, you can have your super PAC. The whole premise of the super PAC is that corporations are people too, which I don't think they are. I don't think the people who died on the beaches of Normandy did it for a bunch of corporations. They did it for people and freedom and safety and security of people, not corporations. And putting that aside, we have decided as a society that we can put limits on the donations that people make to campaigns. And the two limits we've imposed is one, a cap on how much they can give, $2,800. That's all you can give me, or any individual can give me. The second thing we've done is said, if you give me that money, you have to say your name, your address, and who you work for, and what your occupation is. So that, like, you can look up who's giving me money. You can say, who's giving this guy Delaney money? And what do they do? So you can decide, like, if you don't like my position, you can say, well, what if he's getting money from these people? I want to be able to see that. But a super PAC, which is created by Citizens United, there is no limit to what anyone can give. They can give $20 million, they can give $100 million. And there is no disclosure. So they can do it in secret. They can do it in secret. So when people run ads against renewable tax credits, and those ads say, you know, this so-and-so politician wants to raise your energy prices, because that's kind of as they run. Paid for by Americans for Cheap Energy. Who's against Americans for Cheap Energy? But if you realize that Americans for Cheap Energy was funded by fossil fuel companies, you might think differently about it. And so what I'm going to do as president is I'm going to make sure we have disclosure, and we're going to put limits. Right, and I think that'll change money in politics a lot on this issue. The other thing we got to do is get rid of gerrymandering, which is an insidious force. Just insidious.
Hey John, so we're running short on time.
Got it.
And we want to make sure that we take away what you guys are saying to us, what you're seeing on the ground level. So we could just take a moment to go around the table, I think, and if everyone could jump in with what do they think is one issue that they would really like to see the federal government address to help support innovation and the success of our entrepreneurs. I think that'd be a helpful takeaway for us.
Great.
Put you on the hot seat, Jared.
One short issue.
I think the question I asked is I would like to see the federal government target resources at communities in New Hampshire that are struggling but are still unable to access resources that already exist at the federal level.
Great.
Tackle legal reform, making it more accessible, affordable liquid labor, other people had that. But one that I didn't really talk about was more opportunity for small businesses when you're giving out grants. I've looked at state grants and any bids. Like someone got paid $300,000 to write a 10-year plan. One person got charged. So I think that you should make it more small, like $1,000 grants and opportunities.
Right.
Healthcare,
Healthcare.
no question again.
Yep.
So I'm still working full time so that we can keep our healthcare on top of the work that we're
So
doing.
I'd say,
Yeah.
what do
totally.
you do when you're?
I work at SNU,
Got it.
Southern New Hampshire University.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yep.
I'll say healthcare.
Healthcare, yeah.
Reduction in taxes.
I think clean energy because mine's for little kids, and so it wouldn't massively shift those public investments from subsidizing fossil fuels to making clean energy transition.
By the way, I've called for $5 billion a year of the subsidies we give fossil fuel companies, so $50 billion over 10 years, to be used by the federal government to purchase carbon, to stimulate the negative emissions technology industry in this country.
R&D in that field is hugely important.
And you can't get R&D unless people know there's a market for it.
Yeah.
Nori, have you heard of Nori?
Nori.
This kid, a guy, Chris Jusby. Nori, they're over in Washington now, but they have made a Bitcoin, carbon market.
Oh, cool.
Check them out, Nori.
Yeah, well,
I go with access to capital. Regulation crowdfunding held a lot of promise, and then it got over-regulated, and I'm not seeing anyone really using it. And to the extent that the regulations around private investors limit people to be able to, private people to be able to invest in companies, you're capped at maybe 10% of the population that qualifies, maybe 3% of them actually are active in the market. So looking at some regulations that open up,
right.
you know, the opportunities beyond the standard accredited.
And this is where perfect is the enemy of the good. Like, you hear this with community banks all the time. People are like, community banks are getting crushed by regulations, which they are, and they're being sold. And I'm like, listen, we either give them relief, or we're going to lose them all. Now, if we give them relief, some of them are going to do bad things, and there's going to be problems. But would you rather have that, or would you rather have all the community banks go away? And it's the same thing with this stuff, right? If you over-regulate this crowdfunding stuff, yeah, you'll never have a problem, but you'll never have an industry. I'd much rather have a growing, vibrant kind of industry, and then every once in a while there'll be a problem. And you can insure that, right? You can create little insurance programs and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Just like with our credit cards, you know, if someone steals your credit card, you're only liable for, what is it, like $50 or something?
They did just change it. I think that's the new.
But the theory was, you know, we could either over-regulate the heck out of this thing, or we could let people basically use the credit cards, make it easy. And if someone gets, excuse my language, screwed, we'll create kind of a social insurance product for that. So, I agree. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, better payments on Medicaid.
Higher Medicaid rates, yeah.
Mine would be training for like skilled workers and like labor forces, kind of step away that just to be successful in this country, you don't have to go to a 4-year college or
Absolutely.
something.
Push
You
the
can
make it
do
that
trade
way.
work, you can sit there, like you said, become an electrician.
Electrician, yeah.
Yeah, plumber and things like that, and those are still good jobs that you can go and start a business with, or you can work for somebody else and still have a good, happy life with that.
And one thing I also wanted to say is I wish that insurance would cover some prevention.
Yeah.
Like nobody is starting to cover weight loss, but a lot of
An ounce of prevention.
Yeah, so if people could be getting the money to go to the weight loss program, that would help too, because then they would not have the diabetes, they would cut down on the high blood pressures, those other
Things,
things that are associated with weight, obesity. So.
One of the things I've also called for that will help New Hampshire is I want to have 25% of the government contractors in this country have half of their employees in places that are economically struggling. There's no reason why the U.S. government, which is the biggest buyer of goods and services in the world through your tax dollars, shouldn't encourage these businesses to be located all over the country. We don't need more of these things in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, right? And the simple way to do it is right now we have preferences for government contracts. If you're a woman-owned business or a veteran-owned business, you get a preference, and I support those things. We should also have a preference for businesses that have half their employees in struggling communities, because that's something we need more, and that would help places like that. Thank you all very much. This was terrific. I enjoyed it. Yeah. Good luck with everything. Yeah. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will think about it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for that.
That'd be great. Just wait
thank you, sir.
We're going to see you later today for our podcast.
Cool. I'll see you over there.
What have you done?
Exactly. Well, actually, we're going to go the other way. I don't want to hit the window.
Yeah.
You are an all-purpose candidate, sir. There we go. Wonderful.
I mean, I think the regulations went.
So I've read the news report, and I don't know, maybe you could clarify that you've been critical of. Well, you kind of wait for that noise to go. So you've been critical of the socialist democratic policies. And I was just wondering, what is your definition of socialism?
Well, I've been critical of the policies, right? So some of these policies haven't been well thought through. They're not actually good policies at the end of the day, and I don't think they're actually good for us politically. So I've been critical of the policies.
Well, I mean, you did call them socialist on the YouTube show, is that correct?
Yes. Like, I'm critical of socialism, period. I don't think socialism is the right answer to our issues. I don't think government-only solutions, which is effectively what socialism is in many ways, is the answer to solving a lot of the big problems we have in this country. For example, on healthcare, I think every American should have healthcare as a right, but insisting that it be a government-only program will result in a healthcare system that in many ways mirrors what we have with Medicaid and Medicare in this country, where the payments are too low and it won't be a healthy system.
So if I could inject, it sounds like your definition is government control of programs or overseeing. But a lot of
government only. I think government should regulate things, and I think government should be investing in things, and I think government should be creating the right incentives, and I think government should be a partner. But I don't believe that the way to solve problems is through government-only solutions.
So I guess what I'm trying to drive up is that a lot of people on the right will equate socialism with the means, government owns the means of production.
That's the definition of it.
And so, well, there's a little difference between government programs and government owning the means of production. And, one being, maybe communist in terms of a definition. And I guess where I'm going with this, aren't you concerned that you're following into some of the talking points of the right to compare what the Democrats are doing to Venezuela, for instance?
No, I'm not comparing anything to Venezuela. I mean, what I'm saying is that certain policies are half-baked. They're not good policies. They will hurt the American people. And I'm criticizing those policies. And I'm putting forth my alternatives, which I believe are fundamentally better ideas.
and you're not concerned about, going into, being trapped into right-wing talking points.
Not at all.
That's awesome.
No, I'm not at all concerned about it at all, because I'm putting forth big progressive ideas. I mean, I have the best plan to deal with climate change. I have the best plan to ensure that every American has access to health care. I have the best plan to ensure that we get people investing in communities that are left behind. I've got a plan to ensure that every young person starts at pre-K as a basic right and has something after high school, either community college or career and technical training as part of basic public education. These are big, bold, progressive ideas. I'm not concerned about getting caught up with right-wing talking points. But where I do differ than some of my competitors is I've really thought through both what's the right policy and how we get it done. So,
We've got to wrap up.
Yep.
Terrific. Thank you, sir.